To my family, I was Natalie Ryder, the disappointment. The quiet daughter with the boring government job and a complete lack of ambition. At our last family dinner, my own father looked me in the eye and told me I would never be anything. The very next morning, he walked into the most important meeting of his life to find me sitting at the head of the table. His boss, a 3-star general, stood up and saluted. "Good morning, Colonel. This isn't just a story about revenge. It's about taking back your power, destroying a world built on lies, and forcing the people who underestimated you to finally face the truth. It's about the moment they realize their scapegoat has become their commander. If you're ready for the ultimate satisfaction of seeing the tables turn, then make sure you subscribe so you don't miss a single chapter. Hit that like button if you're ready for some epic payback. And I want to see how far this story goes. Drop a comment below with the city you're from. The scent of Brenda's aggressively floral potpourri was the first assault. It clung to the air in the foyer of my father's house, a sterile, chemical sweetness designed to mask the absence of any real warmth. I took a steadying breath, schooling my features into a mask of placid neutrality I'd perfected over a decade of these weekly ordeals. Sunday dinner at the Riders was less a family gathering and more a court proceeding where I was perpetually the one on trial. "Natalie, you're here," Brenda said, gliding out of the living room. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. It never did. It was a tight practice thing, the same one she used for catering staff and garden club rivals. She was dressed in a cream-colored cashmere twin set that probably cost more than my monthly rent. "We were about to start. Mark has some wonderful news." She air-kissed a spot somewhere near my left ear and steered me toward the dining room. The table was, as always, set for a magazine shoot. Polished silverware gleamed under the chandelier, wine glasses sparkled, and a centerpiece of impossibly perfect lilies threatened to suffocate the scent of the roast beef. My father, Mark, was holding court at the head of the table, his face flushed with self-importance. My half-brother, Leo, sat opposite me, scrolling through his phone with an air of profound boredom, a smirk already playing on his lips. "There she is," my father boomed, gesturing with his wine glass. "Traffic bad." "The usual," I said, taking my seat. "Well, pour her a glass, Leo," Mark said. "Tonight is a celebration. You are looking at the man who is about to land the biggest account of his career." He puffed out his chest. "The bigwigs from the Pentagon are flying in for my final presentation tomorrow. We're talking the Project Chimera initiative. Billions on the line." The CEO himself told me, "Mark, this is all you." "Oh, Mark, that's marvelous," Brenda cooed, placing a hand on his arm. "We'll finally be able to join the Oak Ridge Country Club." Leo looked up from his phone, his smirk widening. "Big money, huh, Dad? Maybe you can float me a loan for my new fund. We're projecting a 30% return this quarter." He glanced at me. "It's a bit more exciting than, what is it you do again, Nat?" "Pushing papers for some government bureau." "I'm an administrator," I said, the lie tasting like cardboard. It was my standard gray rock answer. Vague, unimpressive, and designed to end the conversation. "An administrator," Brenda repeated, her voice laced with pity. "Well, every office needs one. It's just, don't you want more, dear? A real career? A husband? Your biological clock isn't getting any younger." I focused on cutting a piece of roast beef that was far too tough. "I'm happy with my life." My father sighed, a theatrical, world-weary sound. He put down his fork and knife and leaned forward, adopting the tone he used when he was about to impart some grave, fatherly wisdom. "Look, Natalie, we don't say these things to be cruel. Brenda, Leo, we're your family. We just worry." He looked around the table, gathering support from his co-conspirators. Brenda nodded sagely. Leo shrugged, a silent affirmation. "You're smart," Dad continued, his voice softening into a performance of concern. "You have potential, but you're hiding. This little admin job, this tiny apartment, it's a dead end. It's time you did something with your life." "Honestly, Natalie," he said, his gaze meeting mine, a mixture of pity and disappointment swimming in his eyes. "You'll never be anything if you stay on this path." The words landed in the center of the table and detonated. The air went still. Even Leo looked momentarily uncomfortable. The chandelier's light seemed to dim. I could feel the familiar burn behind my eyes, the tightening in my throat. I looked down at my plate, at the perfectly arranged food that now looked like ash. I took a slow, deliberate sip of water, swallowed the lump of rage and hurt, and said nothing. In this house, my silence was the only weapon I had.
For now.
My apartment was my sanctuary. It was the antithesis of my father's house. No potpourri, no clutter, no pretense. The walls were a cool, calming gray, adorned with only a single print of a Japanese ink wash painting of a mountain. The furniture was functional, modern, and sparse. A black leather sofa, a glass coffee table holding a single book, a meticulously organized kitchen. To my family, it was proof of a life unlived. To me, it was proof of a life under control. I shrugged off the thin jacket I'd worn. Brenda's parting shot had been about its unflattering cut, and let it fall onto a chair. For a few long moments, I stood in the center of the living room, letting the silence wash over me, cleansing the residue of their judgment. "You'll never be anything." My father's words echoed in the quiet space, but here, they lost their power. Here, they were just noise. The anger came first, a hot, familiar wave. Then the hurt, a deeper, colder current that had been with me for years. It wasn't just tonight. It was a lifetime of being measured and found wanting. I walked to the window, looking out at the city lights twinkling like a field of fallen stars. I thought back to a dinner much like this one 10 years ago. I was 19, a sophomore in college, full of fire and a naive sense of purpose. "I've decided to join the Air Force ROTC program," I had announced, my chest swelling with pride. Leo had snorted. Brenda had looked horrified. My father had set his fork down with a heavy thud. "Absolutely not," he'd said. "Why?" I'd challenged. "I want to serve. I want to fly." He had shaken his head, that same look of pity in his eyes. "Natalie, be realistic. The military is for people with no other options. It's a place for grunts and tradesmen, not for a writer. You're going to finish your business degree and get a respectable job." He never understood. He never tried to. He saw my ambition not as a strength, but as a bizarre form of rebellion against the comfortable, predictable life he had mapped out for me. So I learned to operate in the shadows. I finished my degree, but I also finished the program. I went to officer training school. I didn't just serve, I excelled. My path was steeper and harder than anyone knew, my promotions faster. And the work I ended up in, it demanded absolute secrecy. The official reason I never talked about my job was because of special access program requirements and national security directives. The personal reason was that I refused to give them another piece of my life, to tarnish with their small-minded judgment. I turned from the window and walked down the short hallway to my bedroom. Against the far wall was a tall, steel gray locker, the kind you'd find in a high-end gym, secured with a biometric fingerprint lock. I pressed my thumb against the pad. It clicked open softly. Hanging inside, encased in a clear protective bag, was my armor. It wasn't the standard-issue camouflage I sometimes wore in the field. This was my service dress uniform. The deep, authoritative blue of the jacket was flawless, the lapels sharp enough to cut glass. I ran my fingers over the sleeves. On the shoulders, silver eagles were pinned, their wings spread wide, the insignia of a full-bird colonel. Below them, on the breast of the jacket, was a row of ribbons, a quiet, colorful testament to a life lived far from their dinner table, medals for merit, for service in hostile zones, for command. I stared at the uniform, at the reflection of the woman I was, not the girl they thought I was. They had called me nothing. They had called me a dead end. Tomorrow, they would learn just how wrong they were. The sun rose at 5:30, and I was already on my second mile on the treadmill. The steady rhythm of my feet hitting the belt was a metronome for my thoughts, ordering the day ahead. The apartment was still dark, the city still mostly asleep. This was my time. The quiet hour where I was simply Natalie, before I had to put on the uniform and become Colonel Ryder. After a quick, efficient shower, I was in the kitchen making coffee when my phone buzzed. It was Dad. I let it go to voicemail, but he called back immediately. A sign of panic. With a sigh, I tapped the screen. "Natalie?" "Thank God," he said, his voice tight with stress. "I couldn't sleep all night." "Morning, Dad. Everything okay?" I asked, my tone perfectly level. "Okay? Of course it's not okay. This presentation today, everything is riding on it. Everything. The CEO is going to be there, the board members, and this whole delegation from the Pentagon. Stiffs in uniforms who think they know everything about everything." I took a slow sip of my black coffee, the steam warming my face. The irony was so thick I could taste it. "I'm sure you're prepared. You've been working on it for months." "Prepared?" He laughed, a high, nervous sound. "You can never be prepared enough for these military types. They live to find flaws. They get some kind of sick pleasure out of tearing down civilian contractors. Especially this General Thompson, who's leading the delegation. I hear he's a real hard-ass." General Marcus Thompson, a man with whom I had weekly strategy meetings, a man who valued precision and honesty above all else, a man who called me Nat in private but would call me Colonel in public. A hard ass, yes, but a fair one. "And there's some colonel who's the actual project lead," my father continued, rambling now. "The final decision maker. Can you believe it? Some lifer who's probably never seen a real balance sheet in their life is going to decide the fate of a $10 billion aerospace project." I almost smiled. "Well, I'm sure if your team's proposal is solid, you have nothing to worry about." I couldn't resist a small poke. "Your logistics and supply chain projections are airtight, right? That's always the first place they look for weaknesses." He scoffed, just as I knew he would. "Of course they are. My team is the best in the business. Don't you worry your pretty little head about it. Look, I don't know why I called. I'm just venting. I should go. I need to reread my talking points." "Okay, Dad. Good luck," I said. "I'm sure you'll do great." Yeah, he muttered, and the line went dead. I placed my coffee mug in the sink and rinsed it out. The game was no longer just a thought, it was in motion. The pieces were moving across the board, all converging on a single room, a single moment. My father thought he was the king. He had no idea he was only a pawn. The transformation began at 7 o'clock. The act of putting on my uniform was a ritual, a deliberate sequence of movements that shed Natalie Ryder, the disappointing daughter, and forged Colonel Ryder, the commander. First, the crisp, light blue shirt and the dark blue trousers, tailored to perfection. Then, the shoes, black Oxfords polished to a mirror shine, their laces tied in straight, precise bars. I stood in front of the full-length mirror and began pinning the insignia. The U.S. insignia on the lapels. The gleaming silver eagle of a colonel on each shoulder epaulette, their weight familiar and grounding. Finally, the ribbon rack, a solid bar of color and metal I affixed above the left pocket. Each ribbon told a story they would never hear. As I shrugged on the service coat, the entire posture of my body changed. My shoulders squared. My spine straightened. My gaze became more direct, more focused. I looked at the woman in the mirror. Her expression was calm, controlled, and utterly unreadable. This was the face I showed the world. This was the face that chaired billion-dollar meetings and made decisions that affected thousands of lives. A black town car with government plates was waiting for me at the curb at 7:45. The driver, a young airman, hopped out and opened the door for me. "Good morning, Colonel." "Good morning, Airman," I replied, sliding into the back seat. The drive to the AeroCorp campus was a journey into another world. We didn't use the main public entrance where my father would have badged in. We were directed to Gate 7, the executive and government access point. A serious-looking guard in an AeroCorp security uniform saw the car's plates, then my ID. He immediately snapped to attention, his salute sharp and precise. "Welcome to AeroCorp, Colonel Ryder." I gave him a nod, and the barrier lifted. We drove through a pristine campus of glass and steel buildings and manicured lawns, pulling up to the main executive tower. As I walked through the lobby, a cathedral of marble and brushed steel, a hush seemed to follow me. People in suits, AeroCorp VPs and project managers paused their conversations, their eyes drawn to the uniform, to the rank. They stepped aside, nodding respectfully. In this building, my father was a mid-level manager. In this building, I was the client. I was the authority. I took the express elevator to the 40th floor, the executive wing. The doors opened onto a plushly carpeted reception area. A woman in a sharp suit stood to greet me. "Colonel Ryder, welcome. General Thompson is waiting for you in the boardroom." I followed her down the hall. My mind wasn't on my family anymore. It was on the mission. Project Chimera's engine performance specs, the questions I had about the avionics subcontractor, the timeline for Phase 2 deployment. I was no longer a daughter seeking revenge. I was a commander ensuring the integrity of her watch. She opened the heavy oak doors to the boardroom. General Thompson, a tall, imposing man with silver hair and a no-nonsense demeanor, was already at the head of the table, reviewing a file. He looked up as I entered, and a rare, small smile touched his lips. "Nat," he said in a low voice. "Ready for the fireworks?" "Always, sir," I replied, taking the seat to his right. The seat of honor. The seat of power. I was ready. The boardroom was an arena built of mahogany and leather, designed to convey power. A long, gleaming table reflected the recessed lights in the ceiling. At one end, a massive screen was currently dark, waiting. The air hummed with quiet, expensive electricity. From our vantage point on the 40th floor, we could see the entire airfield, a view designed to impress visitors with the scale of AeroCorp's operations. I sat perfectly still, my hands resting on the closed file in front of me. Inside were the questions I had prepared, the points of failure I had already identified in the preliminary reports. General Thompson was doing the same, his focus absolute. We were a united front. At 9 o'clock sharp, the doors opened again. My father, Mark Ryder, walked in, flanked by two younger members of his team, who looked terrified. He was trying to project an aura of confident bonhomie, a broad smile plastered on his face. His eyes immediately found the three-star general at the head of the table, and he strode forward, hand outstretched. "General Thompson, an absolute honor. I'm Mark Ryder, Senior Project Manager for the Chimera Initiative. We are so thrilled to have you here." His gaze swept right past me. He saw the uniform, the rank, but he didn't see me. In his world, women who looked like his daughter didn't hold this kind of position. I was just part of the general's entourage, an aide, a wallpaper figure. I remained silent, letting the scene play out. "Let's get started, Mr. Ryder," the general said, ignoring the proffered hand. My father's smile faltered for a fraction of a second before he recovered. Of course, of course." He bustled to the podium, his team scurrying to connect his laptop. The screen flickered to life, showing the AeroCorp logo and the words, "Project Chimera, Redefining Air Superiority." He launched into his presentation, his voice growing stronger as he hit his familiar corporate talking points. He spoke of synergy, of forward-thinking paradigms, of shareholder value. He was playing the role of the big-shot executive he so desperately wanted to be. A small, smug smile began to form on his lips as he clicked to a slide detailing their proposed budget. That's when General Thompson held up a single, commanding hand. The wordless gesture cut through my father's flow of jargon like a knife. He stopped mid-sentence, his mouth hanging open. "General?" "Mark," the general said, his voice flat and cold, "I think you've made a procedural error. You've launched into a presentation without acknowledging the ranking officer responsible for this project." My father's face went blank with confusion. His eyes darted around the room. I'm sorry, sir. I acknowledged you." "Not me," the general said, turning his head slightly. His gaze moved to me, and he gestured with an open hand. "You haven't met the project lead. Colonel Ryder is the final authority on this." It happened in slow motion. My father's head turned, his eyes following the general's gesture. They landed on me. For a full second, there was nothing. Just the low hum of the building's HVAC system. Then I saw the first flicker of recognition in his eyes. It was followed by a wave of pure, uncomprehending shock. The color drained from his face, leaving a pasty, grayish pallor. His jaw went slack. The confident posture deflated, as if his strings had been cut. The glossy presentation remote slipped from his trembling fingers and clattered onto the podium. Before he could process it, before a single word could form in his throat, General Thompson pushed back his chair and stood. As the ranking officer in the room after him, I stood as well. The general faced me, his back to my father. He gave me a sharp, formal nod, a sign of deference to my authority on this specific project. "Good morning, Colonel." The words were quiet, but they echoed in the dead, cavernous silence of the boardroom. They were a judgment, a verdict, and as I watched my father's world shatter behind his eyes, I knew the real war had just begun. The general's words, "Good morning, Colonel," hung in the air like the flash of an explosion after the sound has already passed, the silence that followed ringing in my ears. The two junior members of my father's team looked like statues, their faces frozen in a rictus of panic. They stared at me, then at their boss, then back at me, the frantic calculus of a corporate death spiral churning behind their eyes. But my focus was on my father. He stood by the podium, his face a mottled canvas of gray and red. The shock had morphed into a horrifying, slack-jawed incomprehension. It was the face of a man who had not only lost his bearings, but had just discovered that the map he'd been using his entire life was a fiction. I could have let the silence stretch, let him drown in it. But that would have been personal. This had to be professional. I gave a curt, respectful nod to the general before sitting down. My movements were measured, economical. I opened the file that lay before me. "Please continue, Mr. Ryder," I said, my voice cutting through the tension like a shard of ice. The formality of his name, spoken in this context, was a slap harder than any palm could deliver. He flinched as if he'd been struck. "Natalie," he began, his voice a hoarse whisper. "Colonel Ryder," I corrected him, not looking up from my papers. "You were on slide 7, discussing budget allocations. However, I'd like to redirect you to page 14 of the preliminary proposal you submitted last week. The logistics section." He stared at me, his mind clearly unable to bridge the gap between the daughter he'd belittled last night and the colonel holding his career in her hands today. One of his subordinates, a young man whose name tag read Harris, scrambled to pass him a copy of the report. My father took it, his hands trembling so badly the pages rattled. "Page 14, I continued, my tone flat and clinical. "You cite a 98% supply chain readiness for forward-deployed assets. A very impressive number. However, the data my office has run suggests your model is critically flawed. It doesn't account for surge deployments in contested airspace, nor does it factor in the probable loss rate of transport craft against near-peer adversaries. By our metrics, your readiness is closer to 74%. Can you explain this 24-point discrepancy, Mr. Ryder?" The entire room was locked on him. He stared down at the page, but I knew he wasn't reading it. He was seeing the ghost of our dinner last night. He was hearing his own dismissive words. "The model is proprietary," he stammered, shuffling papers aimlessly. "It's complex. It's insufficient," I stated, closing my file with a soft, final thud. "It promises a capability that AeroCorp cannot deliver, and in my world, a promise like that gets people killed. It is unacceptable." General Thompson cleared his throat. "I think we have everything we need for now," he announced, standing up. "It was a mercy killing. We will be in touch with your CEO regarding our official review. Thank you for your time, gentlemen." With that, the general turned and walked out. I gathered my single file, stood, and followed him, never once looking back at the man left standing amidst the ruins of his own making. The last thing I heard as the heavy doors swung shut was the sound of his papers sliding from the podium and scattering across the floor. The walk from the boardroom to the elevator was the longest of my life. The adrenaline from the confrontation was a high-voltage current singing through my veins. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, to look at his face one last time, but I resisted. A commander does not look back at the battlefield. She moves on to the next objective. My driver was waiting by the town car, the engine humming. He held the door open for me, his expression impassive. The moment the door was shut, sealing me in the quiet, leather-scented interior, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. It came out as a long, shaky sigh. My hands, which had been rock-steady in the meeting, now had a fine tremor. Then my phone, which had been on silent, lit up the dark cabin. The screen read, "Dad." I stared at it, my thumb hovering over the green icon. My heart hammered against my ribs. I let it ring, and ring, and ring until it finally fell silent. A moment later, a text notification appeared. Then another. Then the phone began to ring again.
Dad.
I silenced the call once more. A beat later, a new number.
Brenda.
I swiped it away with more force than necessary. Then came Leo.
Leo. Call.
Text.
Call.
It was a digital fusillade, a storm of panic and outrage and confusion aimed directly at me. I watched the notifications pile up on the lock screen, a frantic litany of my family's implosion. "Where to, Colonel?" the driver asked, his voice steady through the intercom. "Back to base? Back to my sterile apartment?"
No.
I needed air. I needed perspective. "There's an overlook on Ridge Road," I said. "Take me there." He nodded, and the car pulled away from the curb, leaving the glass tower of AeroCorp behind. As we drove, I didn't look at my phone. I looked out the window as the manicured corporate campus gave way to the anonymous streets of the city, and finally, to the winding roads that led up into the hills. The driver parked at the edge of a gravel lot overlooking the sprawling cityscape below. "Take your time, ma'am," he said, and put up the privacy screen. I got out of the car. The air was cooler up here, with a clean scent of pine that scoured the last traces of Brenda's potpourri from my senses. The city was a concrete map laid out at my feet. I could see the AeroCorp tower, a tiny, insignificant spike from this distance. The grim satisfaction was still there, a cold, hard knot in my stomach. But mixed with it was a profound sense of finality. This wasn't just a victory. It was an amputation. I had severed the diseased limb of my family's perception of me. The girl they thought they knew was gone. She had died in that boardroom. The cold, quiet joy I felt wasn't just about revenge. It was about the birth of truth. It was the feeling of a successful operation, one that was costly and painful, but necessary for survival. The old Natalie Ryder was officially, irrevocably, killed in action. Later that evening, in the disciplined quiet of my apartment, I finally decided to assess the damage. I poured myself a single glass of bourbon, the amber liquid catching the light, and sat on my sofa. Picking up my phone, I opened the log of missed calls and messages. It felt like reviewing after-action reports. I started with Brenda. She hadn't bothered with a text. She had gone straight to a series of frantic, shrieking voicemails. I pressed play on the first one. "Natalie, what did you do?" Her voice was a hysterical screech. "Mark just got home. He looks like he's seen a ghost." "A colonel? Are you insane? He could be fired. Do you have any idea how this is going to look? Our invitation to the AeroCorp executive retreat will be revoked. The Millers are going to hear about this. My garden club, a scandal like this, you've ruined us. You selfish, selfish girl." I deleted it without emotion. Her concerns were exactly what I expected: shallow, social, and entirely self-absorbed. Next, Leo. His texts were a neat timeline of his degenerating thought process. 3:14 p.m. WTF was that?
Colonel?
3:20 p.m. You set him up. I can't believe you. You planned this just to make him look bad. 3:45 p.m. This is going to be a disaster. Is this going to affect the company's stock? I have clients with major holdings in AeroCorp. You better not have tanked my portfolio with this little stunt. 4:30 p.m. Call me back.
Now.
Predictable. His primary concern was, as always, himself and his money. I cleared the texts with a swipe of my thumb. Finally, I opened the messages from my father. His were all voicemails. I steel myself and press play on the first, recorded shortly after the meeting. "Natalie, call me right now." His voice was tight with fury and confusion. "We need to talk about what the hell just happened in there." The second one came an hour later, the anger curdling into blame. How could you? After everything I've done for you, raised you, paid for your college, and you do this? You humiliate me in front of my team, in front of General Thompson. It was a calculated, vicious attack. I took a slow sip of my bourbon. The last message was the most recent, left only an hour ago. The anger was gone, replaced by the thin, reedy sound of pure terror. Nat, please.
Just call me.
They're going to fire me. My whole career, 30 years, gone. Brenda is a mess. I don't understand. I don't understand any of this. Please, honey, just call your dad. The word, honey, was a desperate, pathetic attempt to reclaim a power he no longer had. He wasn't lashing out anymore. He was terrified. He was broken. I listened to the silence after the message ended. I felt no guilt, no pity. I felt the cold, clear certainty of justice. They had built their world on a foundation of lies. The lie of his superiority, Brenda's social standing, Leo's success, and my failure. I hadn't destroyed their world. I had simply turned on the lights. I selected all the messages. My thumb hovered over the trash icon. Then I pressed it.
Delete.
The next morning, I was at my desk at 6 o'clock. My office on the base was as Spartan as my apartment. A government-issue steel desk, a secure computer terminal, a wall of monitors displaying classified project timelines, and a single, locked filing cabinet. This room was the engine of my real life. The air was still cool, smelling of strong coffee and the faint ozone of electronics. The fallout from yesterday's meeting was personal. Today's actions would be official. I opened a new document, the template for a formal review memorandum already loaded. For the next hour, I wrote. My fingers flew across the keyboard, but my words were not born of anger. They were forged from facts, regulations, and the ice-cold logic of command. To General Marcus Thompson, USAF, Mr. David Thorne, CEO, AeroCorp. CC, Board of Directors, AeroCorp, Mark Ryder, Senior Project Manager. From Colonel Natalie Ryder, Project Lead, USAF. Subject, Formal Review and Rejection of Proposal Section, Project Chimera Logistics. I described the events of the meeting with dispassionate clarity. I cited the specific, glaring discrepancy in the supply chain readiness data. I cross-referenced it with Department of Defense Regulations 4140.1-R and 4500.9-R, which his proposal explicitly violated. My language was precise, merciless, and irrefutable. The final paragraph was the payload. Due to these critical deficiencies, unverifiable data, and a fundamental failure to meet mission-critical parameters, the logistics and supply chain section of the Project Chimera proposal is hereby rejected in its entirety. It is my official recommendation that the responsible division at AeroCorp be placed under formal review, pending a full, independent audit to be conducted by my office. A failure to demonstrate immediate and satisfactory remediation will result in the termination of this portion of the contract. I read it over twice, checking for any hint of emotion, any word that could be construed as personal. There was none. It was a clean, professional kill. I signed it digitally. Colonel Natalie Ryder. Project Lead, Project Chimera. United States Air Force. Then, I attached the memorandum to a new email. My finger paused over the mouse, hovering above the send button. This was it. The point of no return. This memo would insert a splinter of ice into my father's career, a wound that would fester and spread. It would formalize his humiliation, stamping it into his permanent record. I thought of his voice on the last voicemail, small and pleading. Please, honey.
Just call your dad.
Then I thought of his voice at the dinner table, full of condescending pity. You'll never be anything. I clicked the button. It was nearly 11 o'clock at night. I was curled on my sofa, lost in a biography of Catherine the Great, a woman who had understood power and how to wield it. The only light was a single reading lamp, casting a warm pool of yellow in the quiet dark. The day's work was done. The memo was sent. The silence that followed was a victory in itself. Then it was shattered by a frantic, pounding knock on my apartment door. It wasn't a polite rap. It was the desperate, uncontrolled hammering of someone who had lost all sense of propriety. I didn't need to look through the peephole. I knew. I set my book down. My heart a slow, steady drumbeat. I walked to the door and unlocked it. My father stood in the hallway, illuminated by the harsh fluorescent light. He looked awful. His suit from yesterday was rumpled and stained, his tie gone. His eyes were bloodshot, his face pale and puffy. He smelled faintly of stale coffee and whiskey. He looked smaller than I had ever seen him, stripped of the armor of his corporate title. He stumbled past me into the apartment without waiting for an invitation. "They did it," he rasped, his voice raw. "They put me on probation." My key card to the executive floor was deactivated. 30 years, Natalie. 30 years. He paced the small space of my living room like a caged animal. He finally stopped and turned to face me, his hands outstretched in a pleading gesture. "I'm sorry, okay?" he said, the words rushing out. "I'm sorry for whatever I said at dinner. It was stupid. I was stressed. But this? A formal review? A memo to the CEO? My boss looked at me like I was something he'd scraped off his shoe. They're going to ruin me." He took a step closer. I stood my ground, my arms crossed over my chest. The apology was hollow, a means to an end. He wasn't sorry for what he said. He was sorry for the consequences. "How could you do this to me, Natalie?" He finally choked out the question I had been waiting for. The ultimate accusation. "To your own father?" I let the question hang in the air between us. I met his desperate, pleading gaze with a look of absolute calm. "You're confusing two different people," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "Natalie Ryder is your daughter. She loves biographies and drinks her coffee black. She's not here right now." I took a deliberate step back, creating a clear line of demarcation between us on my own territory. "You are speaking to Colonel Ryder," I continued, my voice dropping into a register of command he had never heard from me before. "And Colonel Ryder cannot and will not allow personal feelings to compromise a $10 billion national security project. Her only responsibility is to the mission and to the men and women of the United States Air Force." His face crumpled. The last bit of fight seemed to drain out of him. "Your work was not up to standard," I said, delivering the final verdict. "The data was flawed, and the projections were dangerously optimistic. If Mr. Mark Ryder wants to keep his job, he needs to fix it. And he needs to meet the standard. Now, I have an early morning." I walked to the door and opened it, a clear, non-negotiable dismissal. He stared at me, his eyes wide with a horrifying new understanding. He wasn't just looking at his daughter anymore. He was looking at a stranger, a powerful, unforgiving stranger who happened to have her face. Wordlessly, he turned and walked out. I shut the door, locked it, and leaned against the cool wood, the silence of my apartment once again my own. The power was not just reversed. It had been clarified. A month passed. The initial shockwave of my reappearance as Colonel Ryder had subsided, settling into a new and fragile reality. My father was, according to the terse weekly reports that crossed my desk, scrambling to meet the new performance benchmarks I had set for his division. He and Brenda had ceased all contact. The silence was a relief, but I knew the war was not over. It had merely shifted to new fronts. The first new salvo came not as a frontal assault, but as a carefully disguised reconnaissance mission. It arrived as a text message on a Tuesday afternoon. "Hey Nat, long time. Can we grab coffee? No parents. Just want to talk." It was from Leo. The tone was so radically different from his usual smug dismissiveness that it was immediately suspicious. Gone was the arrogant half-brother. In his place was a man attempting a casual, friendly outreach. It was the digital equivalent of waving a white flag while hiding a knife behind his back. I knew he wanted something. My objective was to find out what.
Sure.
"How about the daily grind on Elm at 1500 hours tomorrow?" I replied. Neutral ground. He arrived 5 minutes late, a deliberate power move that I found quaintly amusing. He'd traded his usual slick designer suit for expensive jeans and a soft merino wool sweater, an outfit engineered to look casual and approachable. He looked a little less polished than I remembered, with faint shadows under his eyes. "Not wow," he said, sliding into the booth opposite me. His smile was wide, but didn't have the horsepower to reach his eyes. "You look good. This whole Colonel thing it's pretty badass, I gotta admit." This was the flattery phase of his operation. I gave him a non-committal nod and took a sip of my coffee. He launched into awkward small talk, asking vague questions about my crazy job, a subject he'd previously treated with open contempt. He talked about the market, about a deal he was supposedly closing, dropping buzzwords like synergy and disruption with a hope that they would impress me. I let him talk, offering little in return. In an interrogation, you let the subject fill the silence. They almost always tell you more than they intend. Finally, after exhausting his supply of empty chatter, he leaned forward, his voice dropping conspiratorially. "Look, the real reason I wanted to talk. I'm putting together a new venture. A fund. We're targeting emerging tech with government applications. AI, drone logistics, cybersecurity, a lot of overlap with your world." Here it comes, I thought. The ask. "It's a huge opportunity," he continued, his eyes gleaming with a salesman's manufactured excitement. "But to get the seed funding, we need credibility. We need advisors who understand the landscape." He paused, letting the implication hang in the air. "I was thinking, what if you came on as a strategic advisor? We wouldn't need much of your time, just your expertise. And your name, of course." He grinned, a flash of the old, smug Leo. "Imagine, Colonel Natalie Ryder, strategic advisor. It has a nice ring to it, doesn't it? It would open every door in Washington." He was trying to leverage my entire career, the years of study, the deployments, the sacrifices, to put a fresh coat of paint on his latest scheme. He wasn't seeing me, the sister. He was seeing a tool. A high-value asset to be exploited. "I'll look into it, Leo," I said, my voice perfectly neutral. "Send me the prospectus." His smile widened. He thought he'd won. He had no idea I was about to conduct my own form of battlefield reconnaissance. That evening, my apartment became a command center. Leo had emailed me his prospectus, a glossy, 12-page document filled with impressive-sounding jargon, hockey stick growth charts, and stock photos of diverse, smiling professionals in boardrooms. It was slick, but it was thin. An attractive shell with nothing inside. My training as an officer, particularly in procurement and intelligence, had taught me one thing above all else. Trust but verify. And I did not trust Leo. I had no intention of using my security clearance or any classified government tools. To do so would be a gross abuse of power, a betrayal of the very code I lived by. Besides, it wasn't necessary. The beautiful, terrifying thing about the modern world is how much of our lives are lived in public, documented in a trail of digital breadcrumbs. All you had to do was know where to look. It was an exercise in open-source intelligence, and it was a skill I had honed to a razor's edge. I started with the basics. The prospectus listed his new fund as Ryder Capital Ventures, LLC. A quick search of the state's public business filings database confirmed the LLC existed. It had been registered 4 weeks ago. Its listed capital investment was the minimum required by law, $1,000. It had one registered agent, Leo Ryder. There were no partners. Next, I cross-referenced the names of the founding team he'd listed. A reverse image search on their headshots revealed they were stock photos. A search of their names on LinkedIn showed 2 were real people who had worked with Leo at his previous job. I sent them both a polite, anonymous inquiry through a dummy profile. Within an hour, one replied, "I am not affiliated with any new venture of Mr. Ryder's and have asked him to remove my name from his materials." The house of cards was beginning to tremble. I moved on to Leo himself. He had presented his career as a steady, upward climb. A quick search of public civil court records told a different story. I found a default judgment against him from 18 months prior for an unpaid business loan of $87,000. Then I dug into his last official company, a failed tech startup called Apex Innovations. News articles detailed its spectacular collapse, citing mismanagement of funds and overstated revenue projections. He had burned through investor money and disappeared, leaving others to clean up the mess. I sat back, the glow of the monitor illuminating my face. I compiled the information into a simple, factual summary on a single page, stripped of all emotion. Entity, single member LLC, minimum capitalization. Personnel, no confirmed partners. Misrepresentation of advisory team. Principals history, documented business failure. Outstanding debt judgment. The golden boy wasn't just tarnished. He was a fraud, wrapped in a shell of designer clothes and false promises. He was desperate. And he was about to learn that a colonel's due diligence is far more rigorous than he could possibly imagine. I was the one who initiated the second meeting. I texted him the next afternoon. Leo, I've reviewed your material. Let's meet. 1600 hours. I gave him the address of a small, no-frills diner near the base, a place that smelled of stale coffee and bacon grease. It was my territory. He arrived looking hopeful, the scent of his expensive cologne completely out of place among the truckers and off-duty soldiers. He slid into the cracked vinyl booth, a confident smile on his face. So, what do you think? He asked, leaning forward eagerly. Ready to get on board? I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I looked him directly in the eye. I looked into your fund, Leo, I said, my voice low and even. I can't lend my name or my rank to it. His smile vanished. What? Why not? The projections are solid. The market is ripe for. It's not about the projections, I interrupted, cutting through a sales pitch. Any serious investor, let alone any government-adjacent fund, will conduct a basic due diligence check before they write you a check for $1. I saw a flicker of panic in his eyes. He started to bluster. My record is pristine. I'm one of the sharpest financial minds. Are you? I asked, my voice still quiet. Because they will find the $87,000 default judgment from the Commonwealth of Virginia versus Leo Ryder. They will see the articles about the collapse of Apex Innovations due to financial mismanagement. They will discover that Ryder Capital Ventures has no partners, no capital, and that the names in your prospectus are misrepresented. They will see a pattern of failure and deception. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't call him a liar. I simply laid the undeniable facts on the table between us like autopsy instruments. The color drained from his face. The golden boy persona didn't just crack. It shattered into a million pieces, revealing the pale, sweaty fear underneath. For the first time in his life, someone was seeing him not as the charming, successful son, but for the desperate failure he truly was. You dug up dirt on me?" he stammered, his voice trembling with a mixture of rage and humiliation. "No," I said calmly, leaning back into the booth. "I didn't have to dig. This isn't dirt, Leo. This is your public record. It's the truth. And I cannot attach the reputation and integrity of a United States Air Force officer to this kind of liability. It isn't personal," I concluded, delivering the final, devastating blow. "It's a matter of professional integrity." He stared at me, speechless. There was nothing left to say. His lies had been exposed, his fantasy world dismantled by cold, hard facts. He looked smaller, weaker, and utterly defeated. The golden boy was gone, and in his place was just a man who had been caught. The invitation arrived on the heavy, cream-colored cardstock reserved for Washington's elite, the annual Defense and Aerospace Charity Gala. It was a mandatory appearance, a night of shaking hands with senators and defense contractor CEOs. General Thompson had insisted I attend. "Show the flag, Colonel," he'd said. "Let them see who's in charge of their money." I hated these events, but I understood their purpose. I arrived in my mess dress uniform, the formal military equivalent of a tuxedo. The dark blue, waist-length jacket was adorned with my Silver Eagle rank on the shoulder boards and a row of miniature medals. It was designed to command attention, and it did. I was circulating, making polite conversation with a congresswoman about budget appropriations, when I saw her. Across the grand, crystal-chandeliered ballroom, Brenda was holding court. She was with a clique of other corporate wives, all dripping with jewels and desperation. And she was on my father's arm. Mark looked gray and diminished in his tuxedo, a ghost at the feast, clearly ordered to be there by his company to maintain appearances. Drawn by a morbid curiosity, I excused myself and moved closer, using a pillar for cover. I was close enough to hear Brenda's shrill, excited voice carrying over the din. "Oh yes, my stepdaughter, Colonel Ryder. She's just so brilliant," Brenda was saying, beaming at her audience. "She's personally heading up the entire Chimera project, of course. It's all terribly secret, but she was just telling me the other day about the new radar-absorbent coating they're testing. Absolutely fascinating stuff." My blood ran cold. She wasn't just name-dropping. She was fabricating classified details to make herself seem like an important insider. She was using my career, my security clearance, as a social accessory. At that moment, as if on cue, General Thompson appeared at my elbow. "Natalie," he said, his voice a low rumble. "There's someone I'd like you to meet. Senator Crestwood." He guided me toward the center of the room, directly into Brenda's orbit. Her group fell silent as we approached, their eyes wide at the sight of a 3-star general and a senator heading their way. Brenda's face lit up, thinking we were coming to see her. "A pleasure, Colonel," the senator said, shaking my hand firmly. "General Thompson speaks very highly of you. In fact, Mrs. Ryder here was just telling us all about your fascinating work on the new stealth systems." The trap was set. All eyes were on me. Brenda was preening, her chest puffed out, certain she was about to be validated. I gave her a single, cool, dismissive look. Then I turned my full attention to the senator, a polite, professional smile gracing my lips. "Brenda has a wonderful imagination, Senator," I said, my voice clear and caring to everyone in the circle. "But as you know, the specific details of my work are highly classified. I'm quite certain she wouldn't compromise national security by discussing them." I paused for a beat, letting the implications sink in. Even if she were privy to them. The silence was instantaneous and absolute. The senator, a savvy old political operator, let out a short, knowing chuckle. "Of course, Colonel. My apologies." The public humiliation was complete. In one clean stroke, I had painted Brenda as a foolish, untrustworthy liar, while simultaneously reinforcing my own professionalism and commitment to secrecy. The other women in her circle looked away, their expressions a mixture of pity and second-hand embarrassment. Brenda's face turned a shade of crimson that clashed horribly with her emerald dress. Her social standing, the very core of her identity, had just been publicly executed. After the gala, the general suggested a nightcap. We found a quiet corner in the hotel bar, a dark wood-paneled sanctuary away from the political noise. He ordered a scotch neat. I asked for a bourbon. For a few moments, we sat in a comfortable, professional silence. "That was some expert maneuvering tonight, Colonel," he finally said, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. He was my commanding officer, but in these quiet moments, he was also my mentor. He was one of the few people who saw the entire board.
"Thank you, sir," I said.
"I've seen the reports on your father's division," he continued, his eyes fixed on me. "They're working triple time to meet your standards. I also heard through the grapevine that your brother mysteriously withdrew a very ambitious business proposal last week." He took a slow sip. "You're winning, Natalie. On all fronts. Which brings me to a question." He leaned forward slightly, his gaze intent. "What's the end game? I've seen revenge missions before, both in combat and in politics. They have a tendency to consume the vessel that holds them. They burn you out from the inside. So I'll ask you as your mentor, not just your CO. What is the mission objective here?" His question hit me with more force than Brenda's hysterics or Leo's desperation. I had been so focused on the tactical victories, the boardroom, the memo, the takedown of Leo's lies, the public humiliation of Brenda, that I hadn't truly defined the strategic goal. I stared into my glass, thinking. "At first, sir," I began slowly, honestly. "At first, it was just about hitting back. It was retribution. For every dismissive comment, every condescending smile. And now," he pressed gently. "What was it now? It wasn't just about making them hurt. It was about making them see. The mission wasn't to destroy them. It was to destroy the comfortable, suffocating world of lies they had built around themselves, a world that required me to be their designated failure. Now, I said, looking up to meet his gaze, a new clarity forming in my mind. The mission is truth. It's about accountability. I don't want to ruin them. I want to force them to live in the reality they created, without me as their scapegoat. I want them to finally see themselves for who they really are. A slow nod from the general. He understood. I took a sip of my bourbon, the fiery liquid a welcome burn. The objective wasn't just revenge anymore. Revenge was a cage. This was about something else. It was about liberation. True victory wasn't watching them fall. It was about walking away, finally free from the weight of their judgment, a weight I had carried my entire life. The mission wasn't to tear them down. It was to build myself up, on my own terms, in the clean, open air of the truth. The weeks following the gala were quiet. The silence from my family was no longer a tense standoff, but the deep, echoing quiet of a crater after a massive impact. The consequences of my campaign of truth had fully ripened, and the reports came to me not through gossip or frantic voicemails, but through the cold, impartial channels of official business and professional chatter. The first was a formal notification from the Department of Defense Liaison Office at AeroCorp. The independent audit I had recommended for my father's division had been completed. The findings were damning, validating every concern I had raised. As a result, AeroCorp had taken action. Mark Ryder was not terminated. That would have been too messy, too public. Instead, he was formally demoted and reassigned. Stripped of his title as senior project manager, he was now a logistics analyst on a legacy project, a dead-end assignment in a corporate backwater. It was a career execution, carried out quietly and efficiently. The man who had once commanded boardrooms was now relegated to a cubicle. News of Leo came from an unexpected source. General Thompson had mentioned it casually after a briefing. He'd been speaking with a friend at a major financial institution who had remarked on the spectacular collapse of a cocky young financier named Ryder. The house of cards hadn't just trembled, it had been obliterated. Faced with mounting debts and no new investors, Leo had been forced to declare bankruptcy. His expensive downtown apartment was on the market, his leased sports car repossessed. The golden boy had lost his shine, stripped of all the material trappings he had used to define himself. He was, for the first time in his life, poor. Of Brenda, I heard nothing directly, but her fate was intertwined with the others. With my father's fall from grace and Leo's financial ruin, her social currency was worthless. Her name no longer granted her access to the exclusive circles she so cherished. I imagined her in that large, silent house, the floral potpourri finally wilted, with no one to impress and nothing to brag about. She was a queen without a court, a socialite in self-imposed exile. I processed each piece of news not with a surge of triumphant glee, but with a cold, solemn finality. A sense of grim completion, like signing a mission debrief. This had not been the explicit goal, but it had been the inevitable outcome. In tearing down their lies, I had torn down the structures that supported their lives. They had hit the bottom they had always accused me of occupying. There was nothing left for them to hide behind. There was only the truth and the rubble at their feet. The email arrived on a Thursday evening. It appeared in my personal inbox, a place no one from my family had dared to venture for months. The sender was my father. The subject line contained a single, stark word: dinner. My finger hovered over the message, a sense of dread and inevitability washing over me. This felt different. I clicked it open. The message was short, stripped of all pretense. Natalie, we would like you to come to the house for dinner on Sunday. All of us. Please.
Mark.
That was it. No excuses, no accusations. The inclusion of the word please was the most shocking part. It was not a word my father used. It was a word for supplicants, for the defeated. This was not the passive-aggressive command from Brenda to attend a family function. This was a summons to a treaty negotiation, or a surrender. My first instinct was to refuse. To protect the peace, I had fought so hard to win. What could possibly be gained by returning to that house, the scene of my original humiliation? It could be a trap, a final, desperate attempt to guilt me, to ambush me with tears and recriminations. But as I reread this simple, stark message, I thought of General Thompson's question. What's the mission objective? My objective was truth and accountability. The truth had been exposed. Now, accountability had to be faced. To refuse the meeting felt like leaving a mission unfinished. It felt like fear. To achieve my own liberation, I couldn't just win the war. I had to be present for the signing of the armistice. I had to look them in the eye, not as a vengeful daughter or a powerful colonel, but as myself, and close this chapter forever. I took a deep breath, my decision made. I hit reply. My response was as sparse as his request.
Confirmed.
When I arrived at the house on Sunday, the first thing I noticed was the smell, or rather, the lack of it. Brenda's cloying potpourri was gone. The air was still, neutral, carrying only the faint scent of roasting chicken. The house itself seemed darker, the bright, ostentatious lights dimmed, as if out of respect for the dead. My father answered the door. He looked 10 years older. The arrogant posture was gone, replaced by a weary slump of the shoulders. He wasn't wearing a designer polo. He had on a simple, faded sweatshirt.
Natalie.
Thanks for coming, he said quietly and stepped aside. The scene in the dining room was a ghostly inversion of that Last Supper. The table was not set with polished silver and crystal. It was set with their everyday dishes. Brenda sat silently at her seat, pale and unadorned, wearing a simple gray sweater. She looked smaller, fragile. Leo was there, his face thin, his eyes downcast. He looked up at me for a brief second, then looked away, a flush of shame coloring his cheeks. Dinner was a somber affair. My father had cooked. It was simple food, roast chicken, potatoes, green beans. It was eaten in a thick, heavy silence, broken only by the clinking of forks against plates. The tension wasn't the sharp, crackling energy of impending conflict. It was the dense, suffocating quiet of a wake. Halfway through the meal, my father set down his fork and knife. He stared at his plate, unable to meet my eyes. The audit, he began, his voice raspy. They were right. About everything. I was cutting corners. I was signing off on reports I didn't understand because I was too proud to ask for help, too afraid to look weak. He finally lifted his head, and his eyes met mine. They were clear of anger and blame, filled only with a deep, bottomless shame I had never seen in him before. I was jealous of you, Nat, he confessed, his voice breaking. Even when you were a kid, you always had this fire, this sense of purpose. I think I lost mine somewhere in my 30s, and I just pretended. I pretended to be important. And seeing you, so sure of yourself, it made me feel like a failure. He took a ragged breath. Putting you down, it was easier than facing that. It was cruel, and it was wrong. And I am so sorry. The raw honesty of it was disarming. Leo looked up, his eyes watery. He's right, he whispered, his voice cracking. I was a fraud. A joke. And you were the only one who saw it, and I hated you for it. I'm sorry, Natalie. Brenda didn't offer a speech. She just looked across the table at me, her carefully constructed mask completely gone, revealing the insecure woman underneath. A single tear traced a path down her cheek. I'm sorry, she whispered. It was not an attack. It was not a negotiation. It was a full, unconditional surrender. I listened to their confessions, a quiet cascade of broken pride and long overdue truths. The silence that followed was their real plea. They were waiting for my verdict, for absolution, for a plan, for the powerful colonel who had broken them to now put them back together. And in that moment, I had a choice. I could be the vengeful daughter, stand up and walk out, leaving them to rot in the mess they'd made. Or I could be the forgiving savior, offer them money, make a few calls, and use my power to cushion their fall. I chose a third path, the path of the colonel, the path of accountability. I set my own fork down gently. I hear you, I said, my voice calm and steady. I looked at each of them in turn. And I appreciate the honesty. I truly do. But apologies don't erase consequences. I turned to my father first. I will not use my position to reverse your demotion, Dad. You won't be fired, but you will have to work your way back. You will have to earn the respect of your colleagues based on the merit of your work, not the title on your door. That's the only way it will ever be real. His shoulders slumped, but he nodded, accepting it. Then I looked at Leo. I will not give you money. I will not co-sign a loan. I will not make a single call to give you a soft landing. You are at the bottom. The only way out is up, and you will have to climb out of this hole yourself. Maybe for the first time, you'll find out what you're actually made of in the process. Tears welled in his eyes, but he nodded too. Finally, I faced Brenda. I don't know what our relationship will be, I said frankly. But whatever it is, it will be built on truth, not on appearances or what the neighbors think. I leaned forward, my gaze sweeping over all of them, the three broken people at the table. I will not be your scapegoat anymore. And I will not be your savior. If you want a relationship with me, with Natalie, it starts from zero.
Today.
It will be based on honesty and nothing else. That is the only path forward. I was not offering them a pardon. I was offering them a chance, a difficult, painful chance, to save themselves. I was defining the new terms of engagement, and for the first time, I felt the heavy chains of their expectations fall away. I was free. 6 months later, the landscape had changed. The crater was no longer smoking. Small, green shoots of life were beginning to emerge from the ashes. From a distance, I had observed the changes. Mark was still in his lesser role at AeroCorp, but the reports I heard were of a man transformed. He was quiet, diligent, and humble. He helped junior analysts. He put in the hours. He was earning a different kind of respect, one not based on fear or title but on quiet competence. Leo had taken a job as an assistant manager at a large logistics warehouse. The work was hard, the hours long, and the pay a fraction of what he once boasted about. But in a brief, awkward phone call, he had told me, his voice devoid of its old arrogance, that for the first time, he slept soundly at night. My relationship with them was nascent. It existed in short, tentative text messages. A happy Thanksgiving. A hope you're well. It was fragile, but it was honest. One Saturday morning, I was in a coffee shop downtown in jeans and a sweater, lost in a book. The bell over the door jingled, and my father walked in. He saw me and gave me a small, hesitant smile. "Fancy meeting you here," he said, sitting opposite me. The conversation that followed was stilted, full of awkward pauses. But it was real. He didn't brag. I didn't deflect. He asked about my work, and I told him about a training exercise in Nevada. He told me about a new inventory system he was helping to implement at his warehouse. We were just two adults sharing a coffee. As I looked at the man across from me, quieter, grayer, but more solid than I had ever known him to be, I realized my mission was complete. My revenge was not that I had destroyed him, but that the truth had forced him to be reborn as a better man. I left the coffee shop and walked out into the crisp autumn air. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from my lead sergeant, a picture of a grill loaded with burgers. The message read, "Unit barbecue is a go, Colonel. Don't be late." A wide, genuine smile spread across my face. My family, my real family, forged in the fires of shared duty and mutual respect, was waiting for me. The old one, the one I had just left, was not fixed. It might never be. But it was no longer built on a foundation of lies. And as I walked toward my future, I felt light. The war was over. The reckoning was complete. And for the first time in my life, I was truly, completely, and unapologetically free. And that's a wrap on Natalie's story. Thank you so much for following Colonel Ryder on her mission for truth and accountability. Now, I have to ask you the ultimate question, and I want to see your final verdict in the comments. In the end, do you think Natalie's family truly deserved what they got, or did she go too far? Let me know your vote below. Type justice if you believe her family earned every bit of their downfall. Or type mercy if you think she should have stopped sooner and shown them more compassion. I can't wait to read your opinions on whether she made the right choice and what you think will happen to the Ryder family next. Let the debate begin.